What's up YouTube? This is Cody Bidlow with ATHLETE.X coming at you with another video. Today we're going to be talking about strength training for sprinters and how you can make your sprint training pair up with your weightlifting in a much more effective and sport-specific manner. Most of the time when people think of lifting for sprint training or other explosive and speed power-based sports, they think of things like squats, deadlifts, power cleans, power snatches, and things like that. But if you think about the movement characteristics of sprinting versus the movement characteristics of a lift, such as a squat or a power clean or even a box jump, there's a very stark difference that I think we don't always consider. When we sprint, what are we doing? We're picking up the leg, it's swinging forward, and then we strike the ground. When we squat, our feet are in contact with the ground the whole time, and we're pushing. When we do a power clean, we push off the ground, pull it up into the air. There may be a little bit of time where you're off the ground, but really, the movement is produced by just pushing through the ground for that whole period of time. Same thing for a deadlift, even in a box jump. What do? Your feet are planted on the ground, you squat down and jump up, and then you jump onto a box. The lack of a strike, the lack of that ground strike, is one of the things that really limits how much something in the weight room can transfer into something like sprinting. It's no surprise that most people who enter into a strength and conditioning program may see some initial improvements when their just general power and strength capabilities increase for a period of time, but then they start to see, wait a second, I'm not seeing any more improvement from the work that I'm doing. I'm working just as hard or harder, but I'm not seeing any improvement. The reason is because these programs are neglecting that whole idea of the ground strike or the leg strike into the ground, which is something that really needs to be targeted when you're doing any type of strength training or power training related to sprinting. Briefly, before we go further, there's some things you need to think about when it comes to specificity for sprinting or whatever that are the sort of nuanced things that you need to keep in mind when you're writing a program. So when we're sprinting, where on the foot are we contacting? Contacting on the front of the foot. So that's going to stress the rest of the foot and the ankle and everything else up the chain in a specific way. So if what we're doing in the gym is all flat-footed, but what we do on the track is all front foot, then there's probably going to be a disconnect. So when we do exercises that we're going to talk about, like the low box step-up, should you strike heel first? Probably not. Should you strike ball of the foot? Probably. So that way you're getting a more specific loading on the foot, the ankle, and everything up the chain. Another thing to think of, how many feet are we contacting the ground with? Are we on 1 foot or 2 feet in our competitive exercise? Are we on 1 foot or 2 feet in the exercise we're doing in the gym? That's going to be one thing that'll determine the specificity of any exercise. Another thing to consider, how long are you contacting the ground for? If you're on the ground in sprinting for 0.08 seconds, 80 milliseconds to 100 milliseconds, and then you go do something in the gym and everything you do there is 500 milliseconds, 1500 milliseconds per rep, none of that's ever going to transfer into what you can do in 80 milliseconds or 100 milliseconds. So you need to think of exercises that can at least get into the 200, 250, maybe 300 millisecond range and then below. You got to think of jumps that you can do that are going to take 150 milliseconds, 125 milliseconds. So that way what you're doing in the gym is relevant to what you're doing on the track. You also need to think of the postures. So upright sprinting is different than acceleration sprinting. So the acceleration work that you do on the track, if you go into the gym and then now it's in different postures, that may not be as relevant. So what you do on the track needs to be reflected in the gym, in the postures, the timing, the point of contact. All these things need to be considered when selecting exercises and implementing them into your training program. A couple other things to consider when we sprint, not only do we strike the ground, but we initiate that with a very aggressive pop of the thigh forward. So if we're sprinting, say I push through this leg on the backside, what do I have to do? My hip flexor has to pop forward, boom, drive that thigh forward, and then as the leg gets to the front side, the hamstring now has to slow down this forward movement of the leg before it and the glutes pull the leg back to the ground. If we neglect that initial part of that movement, that drive of the thigh forward, if we neglect training that, we're really sacrificing our ability to improve our stride rate or our stride frequency, because when you're on the ground and your foot's on the ground and you're pushing into it or whatever, you don't really have any opportunity to speed up that movement. You also don't really have a lot of opportunity to speed up how long it takes from when your leg is on the front side to when it hits the ground. But what can we speed up? Well, we can speed up when the leg comes off the ground. If I just pushed into a stride and now I'm flying through the air that way, but I don't quickly reverse that leg through, I'm sacrificing time. I'm losing time that I could have used better by increasing my stride frequency, by popping that thigh forward right off the ground. The other thing is since the leg is not loaded while it's in the air, it's only loaded by air resistance and the weight of the leg. That's an opportunity for you, if you strengthen the hip flexors and you make them more powerful, to increase your stride frequency, because if they get stronger and more forceful in that thigh pop forward or in hip flexion, then you're able to get that leg to the front side sooner, set up that ground strike the ground more effectively, and then ultimately have a better opportunity to propel yourself off the ground and down the track. So we've considered the hip flexor. What comes next? Well, what do you have to do? If the hip flexor is driving the leg forward and through onto the front side, then what has to happen? Well, as the leg gets to about here, the hamstrings start working very hard in an eccentric manner, meaning that as they lengthen, because as the foot swings forward, that's pulling the hamstrings, they're lengthening. They have to decelerate that movement and then reverse the leg back to the ground. So what do we have to do? Well, we have to develop the ability for the hamstrings to load in that eccentric manner so that they can then reverse the leg back into the ground. Last, what do we have to do next? Well, as the leg swings to the ground, the glute is going to have to work really hard to send us that way, and our vastus lateralis and the rest of the quads are going to have to support us vertically so we don't just fall into the ground. Last but not least, the ankle. If the ankle cannot handle that ground strike, that very aggressive pop into the ground, and it can't stabilize during a very brief period of high amounts of force being applied to the ground in a high velocity manner, then it doesn't matter how strong your glutes are or how strong your hamstrings are, it's never going to transfer into the ground. So if you think about all of this relative to what we talked about at the beginning of the video, if you neglect training the ground strike, then you're neglecting the ankle. If you neglect training the ground strike, you're neglecting that hamstring, that deceleration of the leg before it strikes the ground, and you're really going to be losing a lot if all you focus on is squats, deadlifts, cleans, and things like that. So what can we do to make sure that the training we're doing in the gym is relevant to what we're doing on the track? Well, for the sake of, say, a maximal speed day, well, what are we doing when we sprint at maximal velocity? Well, we're upright, right? Our posture's upright. Our leg is not getting very high, but it is striking down and back. And you're sprinting at maximal velocity from about here to here. That's where you're really creating all of that energy, which is going to send you down the track that way. So we need to find exercises that emulate that movement in various ways. Because we're trying to develop strength, we need to do something that is strength-based. So that's where something like a low box step-up comes into play. You get a low box or a couple bumper plates, you stack them up, got a bar on your back, swing the leg forward, boom, strike onto the box. Swing forward and strike. So we're getting that reversal of the leg, we're getting that strike, and then we're getting force production into the ground, which sends you up onto the box. Okay, so that's a good strength-based exercise. You can load that up pretty well. But if you look at something like the ground contact time or the time it takes to produce the force that is used in that exercise, while being shorter than pretty much any other lift, it's still going to be a lot longer and a lot slower than sprinting. So we need to then add things like different jumping exercises or different ways to load that strike so that we're doing things that are including the concept of ground contact times, rate of force development, things like that. So we got the low box step up, that's great. But then what can be paired with that? Well, you can pair something like a single leg depth jump, or you can pair something like a single leg A-box strike jump. That's where you're going to stand up next to a box, preferably about 12 inches high. You can put your foot on the box, swing your leg, boom, strike into the box, and jump up or jump up and out. You can add weight to that, you can do it unweighted, or you can do it holding a band, which is going to accelerate that movement. When you do a movement like that, where you're swinging the leg and striking onto a box, and you're accelerating that movement with a band, what are you doing? Well, you're going to get ground contact times, or the strike into the ground is going to take an amount of time which is very similar to sprinting. When you do something like that, an accelerated A-box strike jump, what you can achieve is a ground contact time in the low 100 millisecond range. When we sprint, we're between 80 and 100 milliseconds. So if we can be somewhere in the 125 to 150 millisecond range in the gym, now we're getting a lot more specific to what we need to accomplish on the track. And then if you also consider that the movement characteristic of swinging the leg forward and then striking into the ground or into the box is also included, now we're checking off multiple boxes of specificity, which is really important if we want to have any chance of the things we do in the weight room and the effort and time we spend in there to have an effect on the track. What else can you do? Well, let's say you don't want to do the accelerated movement. What else can you do? Well, same thing, except instead of having your foot on the ground, your other foot on a 12-inch box, how about you put this foot down here on a 6-inch box, and then this foot on a 12-inch box, so your 2 feet are only 6 inches apart from each other, right? Because that bottom foot, that support foot, is raised off the ground. Now, when you swing the leg forward and strike, you're going to see the same thing that we saw in a band accelerated strike jump. You're going to see that the ground contact times come down to somewhere in the 150 to 175 range. So for a non-accelerated movement, that's about as fast of a ground contact time you could ever possibly ask for in the gym. If you take something like the low box step up and then you pair it with a movement like an A box strike jump, maybe you go from the low box step up with 300 pounds and then you go into a strike jump where you're holding a 35-pound plate, boom, jump up, and then you go into something like that reduced height strike jump. So now you're doing it faster, unloaded, the leg is unloaded, you don't have any load on your body, and you're just working on whipping the leg into a ground strike, and you're doing that with short ground contact times. What you're going to see is that the ability to produce force, which force can only be produced at slower velocities. The faster you move, the less force you're producing. So if we do something where we're able to produce force because the velocity is slower, like the low box step up, which is still much faster than other exercises, but you get the point. If we do something like that, and then we follow it up with something that's a little bit faster, a little bit less forceful, but much more explosive, like the A box strike jump holding a weight plate, and then we follow that up with the highest velocity movement with the shortest ground contact times, like that reduced height A box strike jump. Now we're getting into where we're bringing in all these capabilities that are related to sprinting. We got the movement characteristic, we got all levels on the force velocity spectrum, we got high force, low speed, low force, high speed. We're working all that in the same time, and we're doing it in a sport specific way, on a single point of contact, striking on the front of the foot, which is all going to train the body. It's going to train the foot, the ankle, the calf, the hip flexors, the hamstrings, core, all that stuff, to be able to handle striking the ground while upright on one support, doing it fast and doing it, as explosively as possible. With regards to acceleration, we can use these same concepts, but modify them to the postures, the ground contact times, the positions that we see in acceleration, so that we can make this as specific as possible to whatever it is that is being demanded of the body on that given day. We know that maximal velocity sprinting is happening upright. That's why we're using things like the low box step up and the A box strike jump, which are upright single leg exercises. So we're simulating the movement patterns, trying to simulate the timing aspects that we see in sprinting. When we think of acceleration, what are the differences? Well, upright sprinting or maximal velocity sprinting, we're here. Boom. Acceleration sprinting, we're here, right? You're going to see more time on the ground because throughout the range of motion, you're spending a little bit more time there. You're going to be producing more force. It's going to be more horizontally oriented, the force that you're producing. So now that we got maximal velocity covered, we got to think about acceleration. The differences here are going to be that the postures are different, the timing aspects are different, and the range of motion that you're going through is different. So while we still need to consider what the hip flexors are doing, what the hamstrings are doing, glutes, ankles, all that, we have to modify it specifically for acceleration. So instead of doing a low box step up for the main lift, maybe we go and we do a split squat with a safety squat bar, or we do something like a rear leg elevated squat with a safety squat bar as our main lift. So it is going to be slower than the low box step up. You're going to go through probably a larger range of motion, but that is more specific to acceleration. So if you do something like a rear leg elevated safety squat, you're going to be getting that single point of contact, you're going to be getting that split position, you're going to be getting a lot of loading on the glutes, hamstrings, and your core, and that's going to give you the stimulus for strength in an acceleration specific position. Now we can take that into a plyometric, just like we did with the top speed type work, where we went from the low box step up to the depth jump or to the strike jump. Well, we can go from that rear leg elevated squat into a split drop jump, something like this, where you drop into a split position and then jump up onto a box. Or you could do something like that, but from dropping off of a box. So that's more of a split depth jump, where you drop off the box, hit in a split position, and then jump back up onto a box. If you want to do a weighted jump, because of the fact that you're spending more time on the ground in acceleration, you could do something that's a little bit slower, like a single leg counter movement jump. So maybe you hold a plate in your hands, and you're here, swing, boom, jump up onto a box. Lastly, to get that faster movement, that higher velocity movement, and that shorter ground contact time that we want to sort of finish all these exercises with, so we're still keeping things relevant to sprinting from a temporal aspect or the timing aspect, then you could do something like a band accelerated split strike jump. So you're down here in a split position, holding a band, and then boom, you pick the leg up, strike, and jump. These are exercises that are going to be more effective for acceleration, so I think it's worth combining all of these into your program. It's just a matter of when you use them, how often you use them, and how you progress them over time. For someone who is not very experienced, you might start with a slightly higher box in the low box step up, or you might start in a split squat instead of the rear leg elevated squat. And then you could progress. Lower the box height on the low box step up so it's faster and you could use more load. Or you switch to the rear leg elevated squat for the acceleration day so that it's more complex, a little bit harder, and you're going to get much more loading on the tissues themselves because now it's truly a single leg movement. Other things you could do, you could go from, like how we said, you could do a split drop jump. You could progress that into a split depth jump. Or you could progress on a weighted jump to heavier loads. You could progress from some assistance to more assistance on an accelerated jump. These are all ways that you could progress the training, but all in all, they still need to keep in mind these concepts of how fast are we moving, how long are we on the ground, are we striking the ground or are we just pushing off the ground, are we on one base of support versus two, is that force being distributed through the whole foot, is it being distributed through the front part of the foot? These are all things you need to consider. If you look at your training in a way that incorporates the movements, the timing aspect, the base of support, and all the specific movements that are seen within, say, the stride cycle of sprinting, or if you play basketball, what are you doing as you go up to dunk? If you consider all those little nuanced things, you can then write a program that is much more effective for your specific goals than simply going to the gym, getting under a squat bar and squatting, or doing power cleans, or doing a regular box jump. Those are great for earlier in the year or earlier in someone's career, but when you get to a certain point of development, they're not going to make you any faster. You're not going to run any faster because you went from 455 to 500 on your squat. But you may get faster if you go from 300 to 325 on a low box step up, or even better, you go from jumping 12 inches off of a box in a strike jump to 15 inches. That's going to transfer a lot better than something like just your typical squat, deadlift, or whatever. If you're looking for a program that incorporates this type of work, feel free to check out the latest program I put up on my website. I'll link it below and probably above. Right now I've got an 8-week program that is set to prepare you for outdoor competition, and soon I'm going to drop a competition style program in there as well so you can use that once you are competing. But since right now it's still kind of that, late winter period, this is where people are starting to either finish up their indoor season or maybe they are, getting ready for preparing for outdoor. So this is a good time to consider, what can I do now that's going to set me up best for when I am competing in outdoor, and how can I make sure that all the work I'm doing is actually relevant to the goals, it's relevant to the movement patterns, and it's relevant to just what is sport specific for sprinting as fast as you possibly can. Thank you guys for tuning in. I really appreciate you watching this video. While you're here, please subscribe and hit a like so that YouTube knows to show it to other people. Share it with a friend if you think they could benefit, and feel free to check the links below. I got some cool training gear that you can check out. I got shirts like this, I got training programs, all that stuff. So feel free to check that out if you have a chance. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'll catch you guys next time. This is Cody Bidlow with ATHLETE.X, signing off.